So, IT service management, short ITSM, is a proven IT management discipline with a successful history of more than 3 decades. But how well does ITSM meet current and future business needs? And are older ITSM capabilities still fit for purpose? In this podcast, we'll discuss whether ITSM needs to change and why, what advanced ITSM is, what you need for advanced ITSM, and how you can get there. So welcome to this podcast. My name is Michael Pott. I'm a product marketing manager at Micro Focus, now OpenText, for service management products. And it is my pleasure today to have Stephen Mann from ITSM.tools with me. Stephen, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure, no problem, Michael. So I write and talk about service management. That's probably the short answer. I got into IT service management probably by luck more than judgment 20 years ago. And since then, I've worked for industry analyst firms, Ovum, now Omdia, and also Forrester, covering the service management space. In the last decade or so, I've co-run a website called ITSM.tools, and that's very much focused on sharing best practice to anybody who's out there looking for help, really. We also run polls and surveys and find that data really useful, both for helping to see where the market's going, where organizations are going, and also for substantiating what we're talking about in content that we either create for the website or we create for third parties.
Yeah, great. So welcome also from my side, Stephen. So to get right into the subject, how would you summarize the current ITSM situation, and why do you think ITM needs to change?
Sure. I mean, if we were to go back to the start of 2020, the ITSM industry, if we can call it an industry or a community, already needed to change. And then, as everyone knows, the global pandemic hit and everything changed. And in many ways, it accelerated the need for IT service management to change, if only because businesses were operating differently. And very importantly, their employees and also customers were working or engaging in different ways. And from my perspective, it was almost like a crunch point for all of these ITSM trends that we've had now for quite a long time. We do seem to be a very slow tanker to turn when it comes to new things in IT service management. You know, we needed to start to do something, but also try to do things a little differently to how we've done before. And for me, I guess that the bottom line is that, you know, when we look at the phrase IT service management, we see the IT, we see the service management, but it's important to realize that IT service management isn't the end, it's the means to the end. And ultimately, we need to be looking at business success or business outcomes, not just IT success or IT outcomes. And I think that's probably the biggest driver that we have for advanced, or what we're calling advanced IT service management, in that we do need to try to firstly think differently about how we conduct ourselves from an IT service management perspective, but move the dial or turn the dial in terms of what we consider our success parameters. And you'll have seen this if you've undertaken Item 4 training, for instance. You know, you'll see how that has really pivoted from the old focus on processes to practices, and also the co-creation of value. And ultimately, that's where we're going, or perhaps even where we should be already with IT service management. But I still think it's a tough nut to crack in terms of understanding how best to appreciate where IT service management or its components help to create or co-create that value at an organizational level. And in many ways, one of the images that's going to show is every year we run a poll of the content that our readers want us to create each year. And the image shows 2018 through to 2022 as a starting point. And something strange happened at the start of 2022. The ITIL 4 disappeared, having been around for the previous 4 years, and we had something called ITSM Advanced at the top of the list. And it was strange because ITSM Advanced was originally put into the list of, I think it was 25 options, as an extension of ITSM Basics. So, I don't know what everyone's opinion is, but I always think there's a core set of ITSM capabilities that most organizations have adopted, or at least have tried to adopt, and then there's others that are less adopted. It could have been that it was ITSM Advanced from that perspective, things like service financial management or capacity management, etc. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it's potentially something above and beyond that. And if you look at definitions from Gartner, say, they talk about advanced ITSM tools. So they're extending ITSM tools to include ITOM capabilities. So you've already got that differentiation. But when we reran the survey at the end of 2022 for 2023, which is another image that's going to come up, you'll see that advanced ITSM is still there. Interestingly, value has jumped from, I think it was 6th place to 1st place. But advanced ITSM is still there, even though we included an option that was called, and I should have written this down really, I think it was called something like ITSM/ITIL Advanced Capabilities. So it was trying to align it with that ITSM Basics that I spoke about before. So we did see a differentiation between the two and the importance of it. But I'm still not saying, I guess, what advanced ITSM is. I'm talking more about the fact that it seems to have appeared, or at least it's appeared from the surveys that we've taken. And the more you think about it, the more you try to put the building blocks together, I think the more you can see or feel that it is a thing. And whether we call it advanced ITSM or something else is completely up to the organizations that are trying to improve themselves or improve their operations and outcomes. But for now, I think advanced ITSM is a good term for it, because it is trying to get us to focus on something that's above and beyond what we've learnt about, spoken about, tried to achieve over the last 30 plus years.
So how would you, I heard you talking a lot about advanced ITSM, the pandemic being one of the drivers. And it's not a secret, you helped us also writing an ebook about that. We'll come back to that later. But in a nutshell, Stephen, how would you define advanced ITSM? And what is a couple of drivers for this advanced ITSM? I heard you mention ITIL 4, for example, value co-creation. So could you elaborate or summarize a little bit more on that, the definition and the drivers?
Yeah, sure. I guess the starting point is, it doesn't matter where you work within an organization. Hopefully you're always looking to improve, to do things differently if it makes a difference to business operations and outcomes. And for me, advanced ITSM is very much that. It's trying to take what we currently have, what we currently do, hopefully what we currently do well, and improve upon it or optimize it. And there are various things, various parts of the jigsaw, for want of a better phrase, that come into this. I'd already mentioned that Gartner definition of advanced ITSM tools. But for me, advanced ITSM is A, more than the tools, and B, more than ITOM, IT operations management. I just realized I didn't explain what I was talking about. And when we actually look at some of the other ITSM trends, for me, it's an amalgam or a blend of all of these things that organizations are currently looking at or even progressing with, whether it be moving from service centricity to value centricity, whether it be focusing more on people or employee experience, whether it be extending the ITSM capabilities to other parts of the organization through enterprise service management, whether it be introducing new technologies such as intelligent automation or artificial intelligence to hopefully make people's lives easier and experiences better. For me, Advanced ITSM is trying to get to grips with all of these things, and importantly, getting to grips with them in a cohesive way rather than in a disparate or discrete way. Because when we look at how we tend to tackle these ITSM trends, I've always already been quite rude in terms of it often taking the tanker a long time to turn in terms of how long it takes us to adopt these new concepts or new ways of working. It can often be too easy to try to tackle one at a time. So, for instance, you might be focused on adopting intelligent automation or AI-enabled capabilities in IT service management, which is a great thing to do, but that might be being done before any investments in employee experience. And you think, well, okay, maybe I was used to say, and I still say actually, that sometimes I'm better off doing one thing well rather than two things badly. So I can sort of understand the thought process behind it. But the danger is, if we take that example, if we're investing in AI, firstly, how do we know the areas that matter most to the business and employees? Well, we probably know that through employee experience or experience management. And how do we know whether what we're doing is actually making the difference we expect it to do or we want it to achieve? And again, we need experience data or experience insight to understand that. So we come into these chicken and egg type situations. And that's why, for me, Advanced ITSM has to be a coming together of these things. And by all means, there will be priorities, but I think we need to take these trends or the activities that come from the trends out of their respective swim lanes and try and, I don't use the word cohesive earlier on, we need to be more joined up in how we're trying to get things to work together. And one of the things that I noticed as well, and it was only when I was starting to play I was creating a presentation for the HDI event in May, that it dawned on me that when you look at these ITSM trends, that some of them relate to inputs and some of them relate to outcomes. And if we are more focused on outcomes, so things like value, things like better experiences, and you could probably also put enterprise service management in there as well. That for me sort of sits across both inputs and outcomes, whereas the new technology, the changing best practice guidance, they're inputs. And I think we have to be careful that we're not overly focused on the inputs and we have a good balance and an understanding of how, if we do this, we're going to achieve that, or in order to achieve this, we need to do that. And, it's a gross generalization, unfortunately, but I think we need to do more to try and get that cohesive approach that I keep referring to. And for me, that is another bottom line element for what we're calling Advanced ITSM, being more blended, for want of a better word.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you talked about automation and AI, and I mean, automating the bad also would produce a bad value, just being automated, to put it in bold words. But so it would be interesting, tying back to what you just said towards the end a minute ago, is like, at the end of the day, you want to create, or customers want to create value out of ITSM, Advanced ITSM. So for ITSM itself, I mean, what would be some of the requirements in this context to get this into, to get to this better value? And maybe to tie that to another question, and it's a loaded question, is it's probably not just technology that's needed in order to fulfill these requirements that you hopefully are going to talk about, I guess. And could you also expand on that thought a little bit?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because if you think about ITIL and other IT service management best practice frameworks or bodies of knowledge or guidance are available, we've consistently spoken about people, process, and technology in that order. But history has shown us that we do tend to invest more in technology and process than we do people. And I've said for a long time that if you take IT support, it isn't actually IT support. Well, not anymore. It's people support. We're trying to enable people to be more productive, particularly if they need access to new technology services or their current services aren't working as they should do. So, I think straight away, people are a big element of this. And again, it comes back to what I was saying about having that balance or the blend or the cohesiveness, that it doesn't matter whether we're talking about value, digital transformation, enterprise service management, artificial intelligence, or employee experience, or anything else. We need to try and deal with everything together rather than in isolation. And the same is true when it comes to people, process, and technology. That you know this, Michael, probably better than me, that if you just try to throw a new IT service management tool into an organization because things aren't working as well as they need to, it might help a little, but it's not going to help as much as if you're also addressing process-based issues or process-based opportunities, and also the people side of the house too. So, Advanced ITSM needs to cover all three of people, process, and technology. So if we go back to that Gartner Advanced ITSM tools, that's fine. But we also need advanced ITSM capabilities, and you could also argue that we need advanced ITSM people, which sounds an odd tag to put on people, because after all, we're all people rather than needing to have these tags. But we do need to try and work out how best we can use these three, should we call them resource types for want of a better phrase, how we can use them to our best advantage, and also to people's best advantage as well. So, I always think if you look at intelligent automation, and I remember doing a panel in, I think it was 2016, so quite a while ago now, and it was very much trying to get people from thinking that the technology is a threat to jobs, to the technology being something that is going to make people's lives easier and better. And people have started, have definitely moved in that direction, and I think most people who work in IT can appreciate the benefits of the technology. But then we also have to look at it through a people lens and realize that if the technology is taking away a lot of the simpler work or simpler tasks, or the high volume, low value stuff, then people are going to be left with the more complicated or complex, more time consuming activities. So, work might actually get harder. There might be less of it, but you might be able to get round to the stuff that is mentally draining or even physically draining. And you then have to start think about performance metrics as well. That something like first contact resolution. I don't know what figure you'd quote, Michael, but over the last decade or so, people have sort of said 60 to 70% first contact resolution. And if the technology is doing that, what's an individual's first contact resolution figure going to be like? From my perspective, and I think I said this back in 2016, for me, it's probably not going to be an indicative measure of performance anymore anyway. That we're going to have to find something that, whether it be employee experience, to bring us back around to that again, there are going to be better things for us to measure that are more suitable indicators of performance. And in many ways, this is something that we haven't actually touched on. from an advanced ITSM perspective, and it's worth calling it out. As we try to change things for the better, one of the things that we would be remiss to leave out are the traditional ITSM metrics that we've all known and loved, again, probably for the last 30 years, that unfortunately are very much focused on what we do in ITSM rather than what we achieve through what we do in ITSM, that they're very much about the mechanics of IT service delivery and support rather than the business level outcomes of what we achieve through all of the good work we do in IT service management. So it's you've got both the technology needs to change that, you've got the change in focus, hopefully from operations to outcomes, and then you've also got the people aspect of it too as well. I seem to be going around in a circle now, Michael, so I'm going to zip it.
No, that's totally fine. I think you got to the point here, which is like, I heard you saying something like over the last decade, and maybe even before, I'm sure even before that, ITSM was really focusing on ITSM itself, process improvement, along with all those metrics to sum that up. And ITSM is changing, as you said in the beginning, and there is, and it will evolve. Let's call it evolution, maybe. It will evolve to what the market, what analysts probably define as advanced ITSM. And this approach seems to be appealing because we are now at a stage where certainly the people process technology triangle hopefully becomes true, right? Because there was a lot of focus on technology, and there still is, by the way. But anyway, long story short, I mean, what are the critical success factors, and where can an organization start for a successful ITSM, or let's maybe even call it advanced ITSM implementation? And again, the other question, because that's also what you mentioned towards the end, which I think is very important, is the outside-in view. What role does the employee experience play in all of this? Because again, this is not only about like first call resolution or you name it. There is more to it, right? Because work will become more complex as we move forward. So again, what do you think? Critical success factors, where to start, the employee experience. I mean, it's like a big bucket of work, I guess, that that is in front of us there, right?
It is very much like the proverbial bowl of spaghetti, where you start to pull one strand out and you get a lot more out than you bargained for, and you probably don't ever find the end of the strand of spaghetti that you started with. I think the important thing is, and I've alluded to it a few times, that whilst we're happy calling it advanced ITSM, it really is up to an organization to call it what they want. They can call it advanced ITSM, they can call it ITSM, they can call it service management, they can call it business productivity improvement. Whatever it's called, it doesn't really matter, because in many ways it's a little bit like enterprise service management. That when you actually ask organizations whether they do enterprise service management, or have adopted an enterprise service management approach or strategy. Most of them have, the majority have, but they're not necessarily calling it enterprise service management, because you can think about it. If you're trying to sell enterprise service management to the rest of the organization, the name doesn't really resonate. They might be looking for digital transformation or digital enablement or something like that if you're an HR professional or a facilities professional or whatever. So I think we need to start building the advanced ITSM structure by saying, you can call it whatever you want. But then on top of that, what it actually involves is, again, very specific to your organization, in the same way that ITIL has always been about, or at least since I got into the ITIL world, about adopt and adapt. That take what you want from the guidance and make it suit your organization. And for me, the same is very much true with advanced ITSM, that some of these aspects are going to be more important to your organization than others. You might work for an organization where employee experience just isn't something that is ever going to land or resonate and will never be invested in. So to try and shoehorn that into this thing called Advanced ITSM because somebody says it's part of the mix, it's just not going to work. So it's very much taking an objective or goal-driven approach to understanding what's needed to deliver against those business and employee needs. And in many ways, that does take us into the employee experience element. And one of the things that I remembered whilst prepping or planning for this podcast was that when I worked at Forrester in, I think it was about 2011, they had a great matrix which showed what IT thought of their capabilities versus what end users or employees thought of their capabilities. And for every single capability area, IT perceived themselves to be better than what their end users perceived them to be. And you had that gap between the two. So in many ways, so what's that, 12 years ago, already we were understanding that there was this difference between how we measure our performance and how we report our performance in IT and what the reality is, even if that reality is based purely on people's perceptions. And then there was a Gartner stat from about the same time as well. And, all of these are really unusable these days because they're so old. But to me, they're historical insights or stepping stones to employee experience. There was a Gartner stat again from around 2011 where they, interestingly and also boldly, said that at least 50% of the business's perceptions of how well the IT organization is doing come from the IT service desk or IT support interactions. So again, you've got that employee experience type aspect of whether IT is working well or not. And then if you fast forward those 12 years, employee experience really is, I want to say it's the hottest ITSM trend at the moment. It doesn't necessarily mean people are actually investing in it yet, but you can't help but hear people talk about it or write about it or just point at it. Whatever they do, it seems to be coming back to the employee or the end user experience. I mean, what we have to be careful of, though, and I guess it's true of anything we talk about, is that we're not saying these things with little action. I don't have any stats on it, but I'd be surprised if, I do have one stat, and that was 80% of organizations already understood the need for employee experience or the importance of employee experience to IT service providers. But the stat that I don't have that would be really helpful is how many are already investing in improving those experiences. And it's a tricky one because I think the number's going to be small and it's probably going to be harmful is probably the wrong word, but it's going to make people think that it's further away than it actually is. And also, as with all of these things, you get confusion between, someone might be monitoring their customer satisfaction scores and seeing that go up, and they might be thinking they're improving the employee experience, and they might be, but they also might not be. That in the same way that I've bemoaned traditional metrics for being operationally focused about what we do in IT rather than what we achieve, the same is often true with CSAT questionnaires, that it's very much about how did we do rather than how did we help you, if we can appreciate the subtle difference. So for me, just to bring it back round to the second part of your question, employee experience is absolutely vital to Advanced ITSM, because it really is the true indicator of how well your ITSM capabilities are working. But one of the things I've called out for, again, probably the last half decade is that whilst we've invested loads in IT self-service capabilities, because they were seen as a way to get better, faster and cheaper IT support, and also service request provisioning as well, it hasn't really achieved the level of success that we originally thought it would have done. It continues to get better, but it goes at a very slow pace. And a lot of it is to do with the experience. And it's a bit like when you're walking across a park and you follow in the path and you just think, I'm just going to cut across the grass because I want to go over there and I don't want to have to walk to there, to there, to there to get to where I want to go to. One of the things we struggle with IT self-service, if it's still easier to pick up a phone and call someone, if it's still a better experience to pick up a phone and call someone, then we're not going to use IT self-service. So all of the benefits that we wanted, whether it be benefits for IT or for the employee or end user, we're not going to get them because it's still easier to pick up the phone. Anyway, I've digressed us there, which is
that's a very interesting point, and I think it nicely ties to my closing question, at least for today, which is measuring, quote unquote, the perception or figuring out whether there is being value delivered to employees, to the users of services, is a tricky thing, as you said. But maybe, and that's the question I'm coming now, maybe other departments, because they have traditionally not had these ITSM measures like mean time to repair, maybe other departments like HR facilities can help drive that. So my question here is, that is another important aspect probably of advanced ITSM. Can this also help, and again, sorry for having a loaded question here, can this also help other departments of leveraging these new ITSM concepts or advanced concepts or whatever we call them? And what does that mean for advanced ITSM? Is there something specific these departments should have an eye on, like HR, facilities, marketing, you name them?
Yeah, for me, there's a couple of things here. The first is that if you go back to 15 years, I think now, to when that's when I first came into contact with enterprise service management. It was very much tool focused. It was very much about getting greater value from the corporate IT service management tool, whilst also helping these non-IT lines of business with some of the issues that they have. But if you fast forward to now, it's enterprise service management. In many ways, it's not even about service management. It's not about the tool. Enterprise service management for me is ultimately about better business. It's about allowing the individual parts of the organization to work as optimally as they can to deliver those better operations and ultimately the better outcomes that we keep talking about. But advanced ITSM does feed into that because whether we talk about intelligent automation or whether we talk about the focus on value or whether we talk about employee experience, these are all things that are going to allow these other business functions to be better focused and more aligned on what's most important to the people that they are serving. Ultimately, whether we work in IT or HR, we are there to serve the employees of the organization. So it is an amplification even of the benefits that will come to IT from trying to refocus ITSM capabilities on what's needed now and in the future, rather than what was defined as ITSM however far you want to go back. So you've almost got a double dip type situation with enterprise service management now, because you've got the opportunity to share all of that ITSM goodness that people have been sharing through enterprise service management strategies anyway. But you've got all these added extras to come in too. And the other thing that I think is worth saying, and I don't think people are still thinking about it yet, and in many ways it ought to be part of Advanced ITSM, that whether you're IT, HR, facilities, sales, marketing, security, whatever, you're a service provider, an internal service provider, and you are providing those services to employees, but they're the same employees. But we still often building the capabilities around the service provider. Whereas in an ideal world, we're building those services around the employee. And in many ways, that hopefully is where enterprise service management is going to go. And we see it already. We see where we have enterprise portals rather than IT portals and HR portals and facilities portals, that we are trying to pull everything together. But for me, enterprise service management is a great opportunity and a stepping stone to getting to that. It's going to sound a bit flouncy, but an employee-centric nirvana where it doesn't matter where you work in the organization as a service provider, you are focused on trying to make employees as productive as they can possibly be, because it just goes through the logical flow of you've got your productive employees, we've got more efficient and effective processes, and we get better outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. So we spent the circle from the beginning and reached a point where we talk about what we call, I'm a little bit hesitant as well, enterprise service management. As you said somewhere during our discussion, that might not be the best word for what we are trying, to achieve there, but whether we are customers or tool providers or whatever. So if you don't mind, Stephen, and I think that was a great discussion. Before we end this podcast, we are reaching the end almost in terms of timing here. Let me summarize some key points. So we started with recent forces like the worldwide pandemic, also talked about ITIL4, the economic situation, but also new technologies like AI. And this all, in my words, demand for an ITSM evolution, right? And this evolution is what we call advanced ITSM, or whatever you call that, or whatever customers call that, or analysts or the market. I think that's not the point. The point is a change is needed. And we discussed the key drivers for a successful evolved or advanced ITSM, including the role of employee experience, which has grown over the years and which became probably one of the most prominent factors, as you said. There is articles, discussions all around, if you look on the internet. And then we also touched on, how this can help and why, and how other departments can benefit from advanced ITSM like HR. So any closing thoughts, maybe 2-3 statements from your perspective?
Yeah, I think a key to unlocking this for organizations, and it's a word that I guess I've stolen from ITIL4, or a variant of a word I've stolen from ITIL4, is engagement. That when you look at the service value chain in ITIL4, one of the most commonly used elements is engage. And I think whichever part or whichever element of advanced ITSM that you are considering, that engagement, the conversation or the dialogue around it is absolutely critical. And I might be doing the proverbial teaching a grandparent to suck eggs with this, but I think all too often, we can be overly focused on trying to achieve something, and I think there's a an Einstein quote, isn't it, that I'm going to absolutely mangle now because I can't remember exactly what it is. But when being faced with a problem, I'm making the numbers up here. I can't remember the exact numbers. If you've got an hour to solve the problem, he would spend 59 minutes thinking about it, and then 1 minute creating the solution. I think I say those numbers are completely wrong because I can't remember what the quote is. It just popped into my mind. But it's all too easy to do the reverse, that we almost start in solution mode, that we think we know what the answer is. And for me, this is one of the key things that's coming out of the employee experience data that various companies are producing for their customers, that those customers have issues that they really didn't know that they had because the traditional metrics were blind to them. And also they didn't necessarily understand what was most important to employees and their productivity. That we make assumptions about things, and even down to if you're a multinational organization operating out of different parts of the world, that just because one region has a low employee experience score, it doesn't actually mean that it's a worse situation than somewhere else in the world, another region that has a high score. I know all of this is relatively new insight. We know that there are cultural differences, but how does that translate into our IT service delivery and support capabilities? That there's some fascinating data that's coming out from the world of employee experience, and for me, it's the ideal driver for changing how we do IT service management, how we think about IT service management. And you mentioned it yourself, Michael. Value is extremely hard to A, understand, and B, measure before you even get to trying to improve it. But employee experience is just one part of that. It's an element of it or a subset of it. And it is something that, I want to use the word tangible, it's the wrong word, but it's something where we can quickly see how well we're doing and start to drive improvements related to it that then translate into business level improvements.
Yeah, very interesting. And I really appreciate your closing thoughts on that. And just saying maybe, maybe that could be an interesting discussion for the future. Engagement, employee experience, value, measurement, and perception, whatever we call that. So I leave it there. With that, I would like to say a big thank you to you, Stephen, for being my guest here today and for sharing your thoughts on this interesting subject matter, which we called Advanced ITSM. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And before we really close, if you want to learn more about Advanced ITSM, and by the way, thank you for sticking with us here, hopefully, do not miss the ebook called Advanced ITSM, What It Is and Why You Need It, which discusses the subject along the same lines. You can find the URL of this ebook in the section under the video. And last but not least, if you found this podcast interesting, have some comments or thoughts, just leave them under this podcast as well. So this concludes our podcast for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.